There are stories that are told to entertain, and then there are stories that are told to warn. Whispers carried on the wind, tales of ancient curses that are not bound by time, and still cling to the shadows of the land. Welcome, dwellers of the dark, to Nocturnal Nightmares TV. Tonight, we pull back the veil on forgotten horrors, on nightmares rooted so deeply in this soil that they might just follow you home. These are not just campfire tales. They are karmic consequences. They are spiritual imbalances. They are the terrifying accounts of those who disrespected the old ways and paid the price. Forget what you think you know about scary. The oldest fears are the ones that have been waiting the longest. Dare to listen. Story 1. The Echoing Ground. My name is Ben Carter, and I used to be a land surveyor. My job was to walk the earth, to measure it, to map it, to prepare it for its inevitable taming by concrete and steel. I was a man of science, of numbers and angles. I believed that any piece of land was just dirt and rock, a blank canvas waiting for progress. The summer I spent surveying a vast, untouched tract of land in the Arizona high desert, a parcel slated to become a luxury golf resort. Taught me how catastrophically wrong I was. The land was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving, sprawling expanse of red rock, gnarled juniper trees, and a silence so profound it felt ancient. The developers had bought it cheap from a private seller, ignoring the quiet, insistent warnings from the local Navajo reservation that bordered the property. The elders claimed the land was sacred, a place of powerful spiritual energy, a place where the barrier between worlds was thin. They called it tea, a place the holy people had touched. We called it Mesquite Hills, Phase 1. The first week was uneventful, a grueling process of setting up survey markers under a relentless sun. The strangeness began on a Monday. I was working with my partner, a grizzled veteran named Dave. We were on opposite ends of a long, flat mesa, communicating via walkie-talkie. I was calling out a reading when I heard my own voice echo back at me, not from the canyons, but from the radio in my hand. It was delayed by a few seconds, a perfect crystal-clear replica. Strange echo out here, I said into the radio. A few seconds later, the radio whispered back, strange echo out here. Dave, on the other end, heard nothing but my original transmission. We dismissed it as a freak radio reflection, a quirk of the landscape, but it kept happening. The land began to collect our sounds. We would hear the faint, ghostly echo of a hammer striking a stake, moments after the real sound had faded. We'd hear the disembodied rumble of our truck's engine, hours after we'd shut it off. The land was recording us, and it was playing us back on a slight delay. It was unnerving, but we were men of logic. We invented theories about mineral deposits and magnetic fields. The phenomenon escalated. The echoes grew more complex. One afternoon, I heard Dave let out a string of curses from 100 yards away. A minute later, I heard the exact same string of curses whispered from a juniper tree right beside me. The land wasn't just echoing sound. It was moving. It was plucking our voices from the air and replaying them wherever it pleased. A sense of profound, violating dread began to take root. We were no longer alone on this land. We had an audience, and it was learning to speak our language. The breaking point came on a Thursday. We were packing up for the day when I saw it. Standing near the edge of a deep arroyo was a figure. It looked, for all the world, like Dave's same build, same faded work shirts, same battered hat. But I could see the real Dave standing right next to our truck, 100 feet away. I stared at the copy, my blood turning to ice. The echo of Dave raised a hand and waved at me, a perfect, friendly gesture. Then it turned and simply stepped off the edge of the arroyo, disappearing into the shadows. Did you see that? I choked out, pointing a shaking finger. The real Dave turned, his face pale. He had seen it too. We didn't speak. We threw our gear into the truck and drove away, a silent, terrified agreement passing between us. We weren't coming back, but the land wasn't done with me. That night, in my small rental house 50 miles away, I woke up with a jolt. I heard a sound from the living room. It was the distinct sound of a survey stake being hammered into a wooden floor. I crept out of bed and peered around the corner. The living room was empty, but in the center of the floor, standing upright, was a single wooden survey stake that did not belong to me. The land wasn't just echoing us anymore. It was manifesting. It was recreating our actions, our tools, inside my home. The next night, I woke to the sound of my own voice, whispering from the closet. Got the reading, 529, a phrase I had said on the mesa 3 days ago. I spent the rest of the night huddled in a corner, listening to a ghostly recreation of my work week play out in the darkness of my house. I knew I had to leave. I packed my bags, ready to flee the state, to put 1,000 miles between me and that cursed ground. As I stood by the front door, my hand on the knob, I heard a final sound. It came from the bathroom mirror. It was Dave's voice, clear and terrified. "Ben, is that you? It looks just like you." It was the last thing he had said to me before we had fled to the mesa. And as I stood there, frozen, I looked at my reflection in the hall mirror. I saw my own terrified face. But as I watched, my reflection slowly, subtly began to change. A small, serene smile spread across its lips, an expression I was not making. Its eyes, my eyes, held a look of ancient, geological patience. I finally understood the true, horrifying nature of the curse. The land didn't just create echoes of sound and action. It created echoes of people. The thing that looked like Dave, the thing that had stepped into the arroyo, was a copy the land had made. And now I had to face the sickening, soul-shattering question. When had it made a copy of me? Was I the real Ben Carter, about to flee for his life? Or was I just another perfect echo, a walking, talking replica created by the sacred, angry earth? A souvenir from Mesquite Hills, Phase 1. Who was now being sent out into the world to replace the original. My reflection just kept smiling, as if it knew a secret I was only just beginning to comprehend. Story 2. The Hunger of the Katsi. I used to call myself an amateur archaeologist. The tribal elders from the nearby pueblo called me a pot hunter, a grave robber, a title I wore with a certain cynical pride. I saw beauty in the past, but I also saw profit. I would spend my weekends trekking through the remote canyons of New Mexico, a metal detector in one hand, pear and a shovel in the other, searching for the forgotten relics of the Anasazi, the ancient ones. I found pottery shards, arrowheads, the occasional piece of jewelry. I sold them to private collectors, making a tidy sum. I told myself I was a preservationist, saving these objects from being lost to time. It was a lie I was comfortable with, until I found the Katsi. It was in a small, hidden alcove, a burial site I had no business being in. Tucked away beside the fragile, desiccated remains of a human skeleton was a small, carved stone effigy. It was no bigger than my thumb, a stylized figure of a crouching, emaciated man, its face a simple, haunting mask of hunger. The stone was a deep, oily black, and it was unnaturally cold to the touch, a shard of winter in the blazing desert sun. I knew, with a thrill of avarice, that it was special. I pocketed it, whispered a half-hearted mocking apology to the long-dead bones, and hiked back to my jeep. The first thing I noticed was the fatigue. By the time I got home, I was exhausted, a deep cellular weariness that felt like a bad flu. I chalked it up to dehydration and a long day in the sun. I placed the small, cold effigy on my mantle, my prize, and collapsed into bed. I slept for 12 hours and woke up feeling even more tired than before. This became the new normal. A profound, unshakable lethargy settled over me. I had no energy, no appetite. I started losing weight. My doctor was baffled. My blood work was normal. There was no medical reason for my slow, steady decline. I was simply wasting away. Meanwhile, the little stone figure on my mantle seemed to change. The oily black stone seemed to develop a deeper, richer sheen. The coldness it radiated seemed to lessen. It felt like it was feeding, slowly, patiently, on the warmth of my home, on the energy of my life. I started seeing him in reflections, a fleeting glimpse in a darkened window or a storefront, a tall, impossibly thin, emaciated figure, its skin the color of ash, its limbs long and spidery. It would be gone in a flash, but the image of its hungry, hollow eyes would stay with me for hours. I was hallucinating, I told myself, a side effect of malnutrition and exhaustion. One night I woke up with a jolt, every nerve in my body screaming. I was not alone. I lay perfectly still, my eyes wide in the dark, and I listened. A faint, dry, rustling sound was coming from the living room, the sound of dry skin on old wood. I crept out of bed and peered around the corner, and I saw him. He was no longer a reflection. He was standing in my living room, bathed in the pale moonlight from the window. The gaunt, skeletal figure from my hallucinations. He was standing directly in front of the mantel, his back to me. He was unnaturally still, but I could feel a sense of profound, ancient sorrow radiating from him. He wasn't a monster. He was a mourner. As I watched, paralyzed, he slowly reached out a long, skeletal hand and gently, almost lovingly, picked up the small stone effigy. He held it in his palm, his shoulders shaking with a silent, racking grief. I finally understood. The effigy wasn't a curse. It was a grave marker, an anchor, a tiny, sacred vessel that held the last vestiges of a protective spirit, a guardian of that forgotten burial site by, and I had stolen it. I had desecrated the grave and kidnapped its keeper. The figure turned slowly to face me. Its face was a mask of stretched gray skin over a skull, its eye sockets dark, hollow pits, but they were not empty. They were filled with a grief so profound, so ancient, that it was a tangible force. It wasn't here to hurt me. It was here to reclaim its property, and the energy it had been siphoning from me, the life force it had been slowly draining away, wasn't an act of malice. It was an act of desperation. It was gathering the strength it needed to manifest, to cross the veil, to take back what was stolen. I was not being haunted. I was being used as a battery. It took a slow, shuffling step towards me. It didn't feel threatening. It felt tired. It held out the stone effigy in its open palm, a silent plea. Take it back. I stared at the small black stone, then at my own hands. My skin was pale, almost translucent, the veins standing out like blue rivers. I had become a mirror of the creature before me, gaunt, weak, fading. A strange, desperate thought bloomed in my mind. I couldn't just take it back. What would happen then? Would it just leave me, a withered husk, my life force spent? No. A trade had to be made, an offering, a sign of respect to undo the profound disrespect I had shown. With a strength I didn't know I still possessed, I walked past the sorrowful spirit and into the kitchen. I returned with the only thing of true value I had left to offer. My collection. Dozens of Ziploc bags filled with the pottery shards, arrowheads, and beads I had looted from the desert over the years. I knelt and emptied them onto the floor in front of the spirit, a pile of desecrated history. I'm sorry, I whispered, my voice a dry crackle. Take them all back. Just leave me what's left of me. The skeletal figure looked down at the pile of artifacts, then back at me. It stood there for a long moment, as if considering my pathetic offering. Then it slowly knelt, its dry joints creaking, and placed the small black stone effigy gently on top of the pile. It gave me one last, long, sorrowful look, and then it simply dissolved, not into dust, but into a fine grey mist that was quickly absorbed by the pile of stolen relics. The moment it was gone, I felt warmth flood back into my body. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the first real breath I had taken in months. I spent the rest of the night gathering every single piece I had ever stolen, and the next day I returned them, leaving the pile at the entrance to the canyon where the tribal lands began. I never went pot hunting again. The fatigue is gone, but I am not the same. I am a little thinner, a little paler, a permanent shadow of what I once was. The Katesy didn't take my life. It just took a part of it, a tithe for my ignorance and my greed. It left me just enough to serve as a walking, breathing warning to any who would disturb the quiet, patient guardians of the dead. Story 3. The Whisper on Stillwater Creek. My dog, Cooper, was my shadow. A goofy, fearless, golden retriever who loved the wilderness even more than I did. That's why our annual solo camping trip was our sacred tradition. This year, we chose a remote spot in the Uinta Mountains of Utah. A small, unnamed lake fed by a creek the old maps called Stillwater. The place was beautiful, almost unnervingly so. The water was a sheet of dark, polished obsidian, reflecting the towering pines with a perfect, liquid clarity. The silence was absolute. It was the kind of place that felt like it had been holding its breath for 1,000 years, waiting. The first night was peaceful. The second night, the whispering began. It was a faint, sibilant sound, like the wind weaving through the pines, but there was no wind. The sound seemed to come from the surface of the lake itself. It was my name, Jack, a long, drawn-out sound, half sigh, half invitation. Cooper heard it too. He stood at the water's edge, the fur on his back ridged, a low growl rumbling in his chest. I called him back to the tent, my heart pounding, and zipped us in for the night. The next day, a strange sense of melancholy settled over me. The beauty of the place now seemed mournful, the silence oppressive. I felt a powerful, inexplicable urge to go to the lake, to wade into its cool, dark water. It felt less like a thought and more like a gentle, persistent pull, a hook I couldn't see but could feel in the deepest part of my mind. Cooper was on edge all day, never letting me get within 10 feet of the shoreline, nudging me back with his head if I got too close. He was protecting me. That evening, as the sun dipped below the peaks, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple, the whispering started again, louder this time, more insistent. Jack, come to the water. It's so quiet here, and I saw it in the perfect reflective surface of the lake. I saw my own reflection. But it wasn't me. It was a better version of me. He looked rested, peaceful, a serene, beatific smile on his face. He beckoned to me, his reflection's hand rippling on the water's surface. The pull was overwhelming now. My feet began to move on their own, taking me towards the shore. My mind was screaming, but my body was no longer my own. Cooper, sensing the shift, went frantic. He started barking, a sharp, desperate sound, and he threw his body in front of mine, trying to block my path. He snapped at the air, snarling at the thing in the water only I could see. "It's okay, boy," I heard myself say, my voice sounding distant and calm. "He's a friend." Cooper let out a pained, desperate whine. And then he did the bravest, most foolish thing I have ever witnessed. He turned away from me and launched himself into the lake, swimming with a powerful, frantic energy towards the center of the water, towards the source of the call, as if to fight the spirit itself. He swam until he was just a small golden speck in the encroaching twilight. The whispering stopped. My reflection vanished. The spell was broken. I collapsed to my knees on the shore, gasping, my own mind finally back in control. "Cooper," I screamed, my voice raw. "Come back, boy," I waited, my eyes scanning the dark, silent water. A minute later, I saw him. He was swimming back, his strokes slow and even. A wave of relief so profound it almost made me sick washed over me. He had done it. He had chased it away. He reached the shore, pulled himself out of the water, and gave a single full body shake, spraying me with cold droplets. He looked fine. Same goofy face, same wagging tail. He licked my face, a familiar, comforting gesture. We spent the night huddled in the tent, Cooper pressed against my side, a warm, solid weight. I didn't sleep. I just listened to the silence, grateful for his presence. The next morning, we packed up our gear, the beauty of the place now feeling like a cheap, predatory facade. I was never coming back here. As I was collapsing the tent, I realized I'd left my water bottle down by the shore. "Be right back, Coop," I said, turning to walk towards the lake. He didn't move. He just sat there, watching me, his tail giving a single, lazy thump on the ground. When I reached the water's edge, I knelt to grab the bottle. I glanced at my reflection in the water. It was just me this time, tired and scared. But as I watched, my reflection's eyes widened in terror. It wasn't looking at me. It was looking at something behind me. I spun around. Cooper was standing 10 feet away, perfectly still. But he wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the lake. And he was smiling. Not a happy dog smile, with his tongue lolling out. It was a tight, stretched, terrifyingly human-like grin. His lips pulled back to reveal all his teeth. His eyes, usually so full of warmth and life, were as flat and empty as polished stones. He took a single, deliberate step towards me, his grin unwavering, and from his throat came a sound that was not a bark, not a growl. It was a low, melodic whisper. It was my name, Jarek. I finally understood the horrifying truth. Cooper hadn't chased the spirit away. The spirit had won. The thing that had come back from the lake, that had slept beside me all night, but was now wearing my best friend's skin like a suit, was not my dog. It was just the lure upgraded. The curse of Stillwater Creek wasn't that it called to you. It was that it would use whatever you loved most to drag you in. Story 4. The Thing That Wears the Woods as a Ranger in the Chuska Mountains on the Arizona-New Mexico border. You learn to live with a certain level of ambient dread. The land is vast, ancient, and steeped in a history that doesn't belong to men like me. The Navajo Elders. They have a name for this particular brand of fear. Tish, a word that means more than just fear. It means a sacred, cautionary respect for the things that walk in the shadows. I thought I understood it. I didn't understand anything. My patrol area was a remote, 70-square-mile patch of high desert and pine forest. accessible only by a single rutted dirt road. I was the only human for 50 miles in any direction. My closest companion was my patrol dog, a big, quiet German shepherd named Bear. My job was mostly solitude, punctuated by the occasional lost hiker or illegal camper. The real trouble started with the radio. It was a Tuesday night, and a summer storm was rolling in. I was in my small, isolated ranger station, listening to the static crackle on the weather band. Suddenly, a voice broke through the hiss, clear as a bell. It was my mother's voice. "Danny, honey, are you wearing your warm coat? I worry about you out there." My heart stopped. My mother lived in a nursing home in Florida, 3,000 miles away. She hadn't spoken a coherent sentence in 5 years due to advanced dementia. It was impossible. A freak radio skip, I told myself. A voice from some forgotten broadcast that sounded like her. But the fear was a cold, sharp thing in my gut. The next day, the real games began. I was hiking a ridge trail when I found them. A series of animal tracks in the soft earth. They were coyote tracks, but there was something wrong with them. They were too deep, too deliberate. I followed them for about 100 yards, and then I saw the change. The tracks slowly, subtly began to morph. The paw prints elongated, the claw marks receding, until, after another 50 feet, they were no longer the tracks of a coyote. They were the barefoot tracks of a human being. They just walked on for another 10 feet and then vanished completely, as if the walker had simply floated away. That night, the mimicry grew more personal. I was on the porch of the station, watching the sunset, when I heard a sound from the tree line. It was a whistle, a simple, off-key tune. It was the same tune my father, who had been dead for 10 years, used to whistle when he was working in his wood shop. Bear, who was usually fearless, let out a low, terrified whine and flattened himself against the door, refusing to look at the woods. I was being stalked, not by an animal, not by a person, but by something that had access to my deepest memories, my most private griefs, something that was using my own history as a psychological weapon. This was the work of a Yi Naldalushi, a skinwalker. I knew the stories. A medicine man who has turned to the crooked way. A sorcerer who can wear the skins of animals and the voices of men. I had always dismissed them as campfire tales. Now I was living in one. The final act of its terrible performance came 2 nights later. I had barricaded myself in the station, the doors and windows locked, bare a trembling, furry ball at my feet. Around midnight, a soft tapping started on the roof. Not the patter of rain, a slow, rhythmic tap, 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 like someone drumming their fingers. Then came the whispers, not from the radio, but from the chimney, a dry, sibilant sound. It was the voice of every person I had ever lost, a chorus of ghosts whispering my name. Then a new sound, a scratching at the front door. I grabbed my shotgun, my hands slick with sweat. Bear didn't bark, he just whined, a high, pathetic sound of pure submission. I crept to the peephole and looked out. There was nothing there, just the empty porch, bathed in the cold, white light of the security lamp. But the scratching continued, a frantic, desperate sound. I looked down. The scratching was coming from the very bottom of the door. Bang! And then I saw a single bloody finger being pushed through the gap between the door and the threshold. It was my finger, or rather, a perfect, horrifying replica of my own finger, complete with the small, crescent-shaped scar on the knuckle I'd gotten as a child. It was showing me that it could be me, that it could wear my skin just as easily as it wore the coyotes, just as easily as it wore the voices of my dead family. It wasn't trying to get in. It was showing off. It was telling me that the locks didn't matter. The walls didn't matter. With a final, desperate surge of defiance, I chambered around in the shotgun. The sound, a loud, definitive clack-clack, echoed in the silent station. The scratching stopped. The whispers from the chimney ceased. The tapping on the roof went silent. The woods outside fell into a profound, expectant quiet. I stood there for the rest of the night, shotgun in hand, my back against the door, waiting. The sun finally rose, and with it, my courage returned. It was gone. I had scared it off. I unlocked the door and stepped out onto the porch. There was nothing there. No footprints. No blood. Bear, who had been hiding under the desk all night, finally came out, his tail giving a weak, tentative wag. He nudged my hand, a familiar, comforting gesture. I knelt down and hugged him, burying my face in his thick fur, a wave of relief washing over me. We had survived. "It's okay, boy," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "It's all over." Bear looked up at me. He licked my face, and then he spoke, his voice a perfect, chilling, and utterly calm mimicry of my own. "No," he said, "it's just beginning." And I realized the terrible truth. The thing that wears the woods hadn't been trying to get in all night. It had already been inside for days, looking at me with my best friend's loyal, loving eyes, just waiting for me to finally let my guard down. Story 5. The Collector of Silence as a Bioacoustician. My job is to listen to the planet's quietest conversations. I spend my summers in the most remote, untouched corners of the world, setting up hypersensitive microphones to record the ambient sounds of nature, the secret language of the wilderness. That year, I was in a place the local Shoshone people called the Valley of the Sleeping God, a deep, isolated canyon in the Wind River Range of Wyoming, a place so acoustically pure it was said you could hear the grass grow. My goal was to capture the sound of silence itself. I had no idea that something else in that valley was collecting silence, too. The first few days were a sonic paradise. My recordings were pristine, the gentle sigh of the wind through ancient pines, the distant call of a hawk, the faint, percussive hum of a million insects. It was a symphony of subtlety. The trouble began on the 4th day. I was reviewing the overnight recordings when I noticed a strange anomaly. Pit at exactly 3:13 a.m. for a period of precisely 5 seconds. The sound of a lone cricket, which had been chirping near the microphone, simply vanished. It wasn't that it stopped chirping. The sound file showed a perfect digital-like void, an absolute 0 on the decibel scale, while all the other ambient sounds continued uninterrupted. It was like a tiny, perfect sphere of silence had been dropped right on top of that one cricket. I dismissed it as a technical glitch, a momentary failure in the microphone's sensor. But the next night, it happened again. This time, it was the sound of a small, babbling brook. For 10 seconds, the sound of the water was completely erased from the recording, leaving a bizarre, unnatural gap in the audio landscape before it seamlessly returned. This was no glitch. Something was actively, deliberately, removing sounds from my environment. A cold, intellectual curiosity mixed with a primal fear began to grip me. What could do that? I set up more microphones, creating a perimeter around my small base camp, determined to capture this phenomenon from multiple angles. The next night, the silent voids began to appear across all my recordings, and they were growing larger. A 15-second gap where the wind should be, a 30-second erasure of an entire chorus of frogs. It was like a form of auditory predation. Something was hunting, and its prey was sound itself. I started to feel it, too. I would be sitting by my campfire, and a profound, localized silence would suddenly fall, so complete and so sudden that it would make my ears pop. The crackle of the fire would vanish. The hoot of a distant owl would be cut off mid-cow. I was sitting inside these pockets of stolen sound, and the feeling was deeply, fundamentally wrong. It was a violation of the laws of physics, a quiet, creeping horror that was slowly, methodically, unmaking the world around me. On the 7th night, it took a piece of me. I had a small, persistent cough from the dry mountain air. I was sitting in my tent, reviewing my data, when I let out a single, dry cough. A moment later, I heard it. Or rather, I didn't. From my own headphones, I heard the sound of my own cough, perfectly recorded, and then immediately erased, leaving a 1-second void of absolute silence. It had recorded my sound, and then it had collected it. I tore the headphones from my ears, my heart hammering. I scrambled out of my tent. The valley was preternaturally quiet, not just peaceful. It was dead. The wind was gone. The insects were gone. The distant river was gone. It had taken everything, and it was still hungry. I knew I had to leave. I started to frantically pack my gear, my hands shaking. I let out a small, panicked grunt as I lifted a heavy case, a beat of silence, and I knew it had just taken that sound, too. It was close now. It was listening to me, collecting me piece by piece. I abandoned my expensive equipment and just ran, crashing through the unnervingly silent woods. My own ragged breaths, the only sound in the world. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I stumbled and fell, my head striking a rock. I lay there, dazed, as darkness began to creep in at the edges of my vision. And as I lay on the silent forest floor, I saw it. It emerged from behind a large pine tree. It was not a creature of flesh and blood, but of absence. It looked like a heat haze, a shimmering distortion in the air, roughly the shape of a tall, thin man. It had no features, no substance. It was a walking, sentient void, a being of pure silence. This was the collector, the sleeping god of the valley. It glided towards me, its movement utterly soundless. It stopped and hovered over me, and I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me, a quiet, welcoming emptiness. I knew what it wanted. It wanted the last, most precious sound I possessed. It wanted my terror. I opened my mouth to scream. I gathered all the fear, all the panic, all the desperate, primal need to live. And I pushed it out, a final, defiant roar against the silent, empty God that was about to consume me. And nothing happened. No sound came out, not a whisper, not a whimper, just the silent, useless movement of my jaw. My scream was gone. It had been collected before it had even begun. The shimmering, silent figure seemed to lean closer, and I felt a final, gentle tug, not on my body, but on my consciousness. It was pulling me into its perfect, eternal silence. And as my vision faded to black, the last thing I ever heard was a thought that was not my own, a single, final piece of collected data placed directly into my mind. Thank you.